are just tools for leading a good life. And what's a good life? A good life is hanging out with my friend Richard, with my child, doing the things I like to do, and I think wealth allows you to do that. So whether that's a car that lets you go where you need to go, a public road that you can use to get there, anything, mostly physical things, but not all, that you can use to do what you want to do with your life. Yeah, so this, I actually was giving it some thought. I have this idea that there's, we have things which you might call zero sum, in the sense that if you have it, you own that computer, I don't own that computer. These sorts of things are what typically fall under wealth. Though there's things like roads, which a road is zero sum in the sense that if I'm using it at one moment, you can't be using it. That's also part of wealth. And it's mostly those things that I think are what we think of as wealth. Things that we can sort of privately own and use and take advantage of. As opposed to, I think, the two other big dimensions to think about in society are knowledge, which no one owns. It's just, we have all sorts of useful knowledge. Knowledge that a polar vortex is coming. This is valuable and it also helps us lead a good life, but I wouldn't call that wealth. I would call that something else. Maybe knowledge would be a good term. Things that once it's created, everyone can share. Almost have to be sharing, and you can't. It's hard to hide knowledge. And then the other one is the opposite extreme, which would be the threat to hurt someone. So the biggest one, either to imprison, the government might imprison you for breaking some rule. Okay, I could threaten to hurt someone. Fortunately, we live in a society where individuals aren't given the right to threaten to hurt each other. Right, that's taken away, which is a good thing. Okay, so when you think about threatening to hurt, having private property, and then knowledge, those are three different dimensions. I've always thought those are the three main channels in which we influence each other's behavior. So I think with wealth, once you have a lot of money, what it represents is you have a lot of private property, and then you can influence other people's behavior. So for example, I just bought this cup of coffee. It's basically because I said I've got $2.50 of stuff that I could consume, and instead I'll let Pete's do that as long as they agree to give me the coffee. Yeah. Which is an amazing thing about the modern world, is that I can basically get other people to do things for me. Does that make sense? And that is a new notion of wealth that I think is only developed in the modern economy. In the past, there was physical things that helped you do the things you want, and now there's this new way in which we have wealth, which is it's still physical often, but it's the ability to influence others by promising to give them your stuff. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. No, and in this framework, I would say the way you remain ethical is you always are gaining wealth because you are giving people something valuable. Okay, so as an example, if you take an extreme example, is Jeff Bezos ethical in his wealth? I would say yes, because he has delivered the goods, quite literally, right? We all use his products. Say, on the other extreme, I've heard one of these Middle Eastern oil monarchs ethical. It's less obvious because basically through the threat of force, they basically took something. Okay, and so it's less clear that that's ethical. I'm not exactly sure about the details, and I don't want to malign any particular, but there are certain wealthy people out there that have done it through force, and I would definitely say that's unethical. If it's done purely through figuring out clever ways to create valuable things for other people to use, then that's absolutely ethical. Absolutely, the people who create wealth for others.
Okay.
The people who produce, as opposed to the people who steal, okay, who threaten force or threaten harm, or those people should not be wealthy. And I think for the most part, that's why I think in a well-functioning market economy with strong private property rights, the incentives are right such that the people who do get wealthy tend to be those who generate produce a lot of stuff, useful stuff, so that help all of us live a good life. And if that's not the case, then I think we should do something about it. And there's worries among economists that maybe the modern economy is rewarding people who have monopoly power. Monopoly power being basically where you corner the market on something and others can't compete. So you're really not generating wealth as much as you're forcing others to use your service because there's no other good option. And that's probably less worthy of gaining wealth if that's how you got it. I think that can be best summarized actually Jeff Bezos. I'm not the biggest fan of Jeff Bezos, but he had a great line saying there's two types of business people: those who wake up in the morning and ask, how do I lower my price? And those who wake up in the morning and say, how do I raise my price? And it's the first type of person, business person, that I think is very worthy of whatever wealth they're able to accumulate. And it's the second type that I think we should be more skeptical of. Because I think the humanities is about leading a good life, and in practice, I think wealth or stuff really matters, right? And and sometimes you kind of like, in terms of the good life, I like that term. At the end of the day, there's all these different theories about how you do it, but come on, do you wake up feeling healthy? Can you go buy yourself a cup of coffee? When you can do that, the rest is kind of rounding error, in my opinion. I mean, it doesn't matter what whether you have, you're mindful or have spiritual awakening, or big fan of the idea of happiness, because I don't think it's very well defined, or we have a very good concept of what it is. I'm a bigger fan of this term, the good life, but yeah, certainly I think it matters. I don't think it's certainly not it doesn't guarantee happiness, but it certainly doesn't hurt. And it certainly isn't true that you can just say happiness has nothing to do with wealth. That's definitely nonsense. Yeah. There's plenty of evidence it does. If you just ask people who are less wealthy and the most lower GDP per capita, they report saying, I'm less happy. They'll just say it. This shows up in global surveys. Now, does that mean, can you extrapolate and say, if I accumulate more wealth than my neighbor, I will be happier than them? I don't think necessarily. But yeah.
It basically means uncertainty. It just means that you cannot predict the future because there's a lot of different things that could happen. The way I think about it is just a metaphor for there are so many complicated factors that it's really hard to predict. And thinking about uncertainty is just a catch-all phrase because people's individual tastes, personal situations, all of the competitor products may enter. So this is something that's hard to predict in advance. So when you make that decision, you're facing uncertain consequences. That's one way to think about risk. Some uncertainty, and some uncertainty can be quantified, and other cannot be. Basically, we don't have the observations to quantitatively assess that implication.
So investing essentially means to me allocating scarce resources to the places where you're going to get the best risk-adjusted return. So I believe that is providing a very important both social and individual good. So on the social side, you, number one, are providing capital to the government, and the government, so when you're investing in government bonds and government entities, you're providing capital to the government. Hopefully the government is using it well and for social good. Secondly, you're also providing capital to private enterprises, and private enterprises generates jobs and economic growth. And if you're doing it well, you're allocating it to companies that are going to do well. They're going to grow and again, develop into larger entities that will provide jobs, will provide economic growth. And then from an individual vantage point, I think there's a number of studies. I think it's fairly settled opinion that there is a correlation between wealth, at least in terms of comfortable wealth and happiness. Certainly if people are not worried about money, that's going to improve their quality of life. I would also note that there are some important longevity studies in terms of how long people live, and key elements of that, in addition to just good genes, are a healthy lifestyle and financial independence. And so those are powerful reasons why investing can generate both social and individual good. Yes, I think the vast majority of people can and do remain ethical. I think that, again, if you're investing in equities and fixed income and private equity and hedge funds, all these vehicles that you have to try and increase your wealth, they're all very legitimate vehicles, and so I really don't see these at any sort of ethical conflict. Again, I might step back and you asked me the first question on investing, and it's as I've mentioned repeatedly in my class, that it's all about compounding over the course of time, simply investing your money and allowing it to grow over the course of time, and that's an intelligent way to invest. I also think since Graham and Dodd started to talk about systematic investing, again, investing is becoming an owner in a company, be an owner in the cash flows of that company, as opposed to traders or speculators that try and buy a security at a lower price that they can sell it, but they don't really seek to participate in those cash flows. They just want to do it to make a trade that is successful. And so I think there's positives and negatives to that, but I think there are positives to that too, because they are providing liquidity to the marketplace, right? And so others can come in and get out. The capital can be raised, and investors can make decisions about which investments are better or worse, and ultimately will be growing and helping the economy or not. So even the speculators, I believe, have a healthy function in the economy, and so I don't see there being a needed correlation between unethical behavior and successful investing. So I will say there's no question that there are unsavory and unethical investors out there, and as there are in all parts of life, and they have an ability to, because it's they have potential ability to cause significant damage in terms of big amounts of money. There's fraudulent hedge funds, there's fraudulent all sorts of things. So I do think with money there's a great temptation, and so I do think it's really important that we have a very strong regulatory system that looks out for bad behavior, and also a legal system that punishes bad behavior. But I really don't see the investment category as something anything other than what could and should be highest ethical, practicing the highest ethical behavior.
Study.
Yeah, I think it's really important. So there's a couple things. So one, I do believe in the humanities and learning how to think critically, and so the investment business is in the history, certainly the history of investing, is all about thinking critically about what is, you know, what is one, the kind of evolution of investment thought, and then what are the ways people figure out how to do a better job at investing. And it's fascinating. So I think it is, you know, again, I believe in this whole notion of using college, being a humanities major, in improving one's critical thought. And so if somebody is 18 to 22 and they really can improve the way they think and write, then they can amortize that over the next, you know, 70 to 80 years, and that is really good. And one way to do that is simply to dig in and get engaged in whatever subject that you find interesting and appealing. And certainly investing provides a wealth of opportunities, no pun intended, I guess, for one to explore. So that's the kind of humanities philosophical side. The other part is enormously practical. So again, folks these days, if they you know, live a healthy lifestyle, have a really good chance to live towards 100, and your life is going to benefit from having strong financial condition. And the earlier you learn, and the earlier you get it in your mind, those to actually invest and allow the power of compounding to work, you know, the more financial stability and safety that you're going to have for your later years. And, you know, for you know, and it will also provide folks a lot of optionality. They hopefully will not feel an obligation to work in a job, you know, because they have to, as opposed to finding a job or doing something that they're more interested in, and having the financial flexibility to do that is pretty powerful. And investing will enable them to do that, and they're a much more higher likelihood of being in that position.
I think there's a lot of ways to interpret sustainability. For us, as an investment firm, we interpret sustainability in terms of resource productivity. We talk about it as the utilization of resources, managing within resource constraint, and then oftentimes we'll also talk about the fact that the output is a sustainable product itself. And so those would typically, for us, we focus on the food and agriculture area. We focus in on distributed wastewater and energy infrastructure. And previously we had also operated a green real estate portfolio. So these are all basic infrastructure and basic commodities, buildings, food and ag, and wastewater and energy infrastructure. So these are basic needs. And we define these strategies as ones that take advantage of renewable reuse as well as resource productivity.
Great.
That is a better way of thinking about it, rather than the word ethical, is oftentimes in this field there is a desire to have human beings, and since this is a philosophy-oriented class, there's a desire to have one single point of a concept. So is there one ethic? Is there one ethical? And I'll give you an example of that. We have an investment in a water treatment facility for basically the dirty water that comes out of a cigarette manufacturing facility. Right, and so this facility is one of the largest cigarette manufacturing factories in the United States. The water that comes out of that is something that the city sewage system does not want to handle, and so they have to manage this themselves. And they oddly enough, for a cigarette company, they have incredibly high standards of sustainable practices. Mm-hmm. So they want to clean the water. We own the facility that cleans the water. we subjected this investment to our biggest investors, that each of them, oddly enough, also had very strong environmental social governance, ESG, protocol testing. And 4 out of 5 said, yes, this meets our ESG protocols. 1 out of the 5 said, no, it doesn't meet our ESG protocol. I would say that uniformly, all 5 of the investors are actually incredibly principled and thoughtful and sophisticated investors and sophisticated ESG investors. And yet they interpreted the ethics of that investment in very different ways. So I think that the more important concept for us is that we are a value systems based investor. We're a principle based investor. So we come up with what we think are our leading principles and our leading value system. We try very hard not to make them a universal concept of ethics, because what we've learned is, for example, Sharia compliance is an ethical foundation for investments in a big part of the world. Their interpretation of what is ethical is going to be very, very different than, for example, the pension plan for the Dutch healthcare workers, or for the Church of England. All right, and so be very, very careful with the term ethical, because ethical tends to connote that there's a certain way of interpreting that. I think that avoid when you're young, and things can oftentimes, you have the luxury of being in some ways puritanical, and that is things are black and white, and the reality is that life is lived in the curves and in the gray area, and how you decide to interpret the gray. And so you need to have enough experience to do 2 things. One is to understand the importance of the gray area and how you interpret the gray area, and 2, enough experience to be able to build up that confidence that you get to define what is your set of values and your set of parameters. Right? When it comes to investing, there is no one iconic perfect portfolio. There is no one iconic definition of goodness, and you need to develop the self-confidence to be able to say that this is what I believe. This is what I deem to be enough. This is what I deem to be what is good for my family, and then the sophistication then to be able to go out and build that.